The colors that are used in the initial stage of the painting, the beast or drawing, are ivory black and transparent oxide red. Now I'm going to mix the two of these together in a loose mixture that'll make ultimately a really dark brown. Now you could mix this in a pile if you wanted to so that it was a uniform color. Sometimes I like to brush mix the colors all the way through so that there's some variety in the color from one area of the painting to the other. The color that I'm looking for really is quite a dull grayed brown, so I'm using a lot of the ivory black in this content. And the medium that I'm going to use today is solvent, not liquid, but the solvent that I use to wash my brush in when I go from one area to the other. And I'll flood it quite a bit with this solvent so that I get a nice thin warm brown color. And this is what I'll use to execute the entire stage of the Beaster drawing. In the beginning, you'll look at your grid that you've applied to your canvas and you'll find the place where the head is located in that first important grid. Then I begin drawing right there. I always start in my center of interest, whether I'm copying an old master painting or whether I'm working from life. And if you can get in the great shapes, the big shapes first, get those firmly set in, then the rest of the painting, the drawing, begins to fall in much more easily. I constantly refer to the gridded drawing that you'll have as a reference too, and I compare where the main edges of the forms fall compared to the grid that I've got on my canvas. Getting the shape of the outer edge of the face and the size of the head first, I think, is a better way to approach it. But you could start in virtually any point of this drawing to replicate it and do it fairly accurately, since you already know what the entire composition is. But I'm trying to show you a way of drawing that I would use even if I were working from a live model and not copying something else. Once I get the outer shape of the face and the size of the head, then I place the features. And I do that just very lightly at first. Now, the paint I'm using, as I said before, is thinned with your solvent or turpentine, and it's very, very loose and very changeable. I could wipe all of this off right now if I wanted to, and the canvas wouldn't be damaged. It's like having an eraser, very comparable to an eraser. In the beginning, you want to get placement first. I'm not looking for an exact likeness of the face, but I'm really more concerned about the tilt of the head, the gesture of the body, the angle of the shoulders, where the bosom is located relative to the rest of the body, and in particular those arms, which are lifted up with hands clasped behind the head. This is where I'll really make some critical judgments about exactly where the ends of those elbows are. And once I locate where they are, well, then the arm will naturally fall away down toward the hand or back toward the body. And I feel like it's just a lot easier to judge, starting from the outermost point. You'll notice that I'm using this white bristle filbert, and sometimes I drag the brush, sometimes I push the brush. And if you do that with your brushes, over time, the edges of the hairs will wear down. The brush actually becomes more useful to you after it's broken in. When you get those fresh ends of the new brush hairs broken off, you'll find that the filbert brush can become a very, very accurate brush. Of course, over time, it continues to break down, and ultimately, you'll need to replace the brush. So it's always a good idea to have more than one brush that's your favorite at any given time. It's hard to start breaking in a new brush after you've worn out your favorite one. So in this case, I'll just use the one brush, but I may pick up another one of the same size as I continue through the painting. Now I've laid in some of the more important shapes, but before I leave this to go to more intricate parts of the painting, I want to get a sense of the volume of this form and not just leave it designed with a line or an outline. You get a very different sense of the size and shape of things when you put them in values, that is light, medium, and dark values, rather than just their outline. They begin to take on a feeling of the three-dimensional quality that you're ultimately trying to get in a painting. So go for that right away, and again, it gives you something that the rest of your drawing can hinge on, and you can look back to this to decide whether or not other parts of the drawing are being correctly valued in terms of light, medium, and dark. This being the center of interest, we always want to remember that the focal point is the face, and that's where the strongest contrast is found. So if we lay in our darkest dark right now, everything else we add after this point should be either less contrast or not as dark as the value that I'm laying into the hair. Now I don't want to go to its full depth of value range here because I want to have some place to go in future layers with adding other colors onto here. So after this point, I'm going to lighten up considerably. You'll notice that when you lay in the values next to the face, which stays a very light white value, if you will, at this point, I can actually do some reshaping. In the beginning stages, you may not have your forms exactly in the shape they're ultimately going to be, but the beauty of working with the oil thinned with the solvent or turpentine is that it's so forgiving. You can lay down a stroke and the solvent will drag the pigment out so that you don't have a wide brush stroke or an unattractive brush stroke in an area where you may want to have something look smooth later in the painting. That's one reason I use solvent in this stage as opposed to liquid. And it's also really easy to wipe off as I did in the throat area to lift out a light where you may have inadvertently painted over it. Sometimes it's easier to lay in a big value pattern in one big paint stroke and then go back and lift it out either with a clean brush or a paper towel or a rag. Easier than it is to try to put a transition in with something as movable as this wash of paint that's thinned with turpentine. As I move through the painting, I'm going to try to add these values that give us the feeling of form. But before I leave the head, I want to define the features a little bit more with a little stronger value. Now the purpose of doing this is not to do any final detail. It's to set in the placement of the features so that in later painting sessions, when I'm painting over this with more opaque colors, if I make an error, or if you make an error, if you're painting along with me, you always have a fallback position. You can always scrape or wipe the paint off back to the drawing. And if this drawing is on strongly enough in areas that are actually dark on the face, like the eyelash line, the eyebrows, the irises, you can always wipe back to that and you can find your drawing that you are pleased with or were pleased with before you went to another stage. One of the beauties of painting by use of the Biester method, and by the way, that again is the method of drawing that I'm using here with a thin, transparent, warm, brownish color. If you use the Biester method, then that gives you a beautiful drawing underneath that you can then begin to lay layers of paint on top. Some of this drawing will probably show at the very end of the painting, but it will be so incorporated into other layers that unless you saw it in the development to begin with, you probably wouldn't be able to see it. I'm laying in the features, placing them, not really committing myself to any single shape. And the way I do that is by not laying down extremely hard lines anywhere or extremely dark values. I've lifted off some of the edges that I created along the edge of the nose, and certainly don't encircle the shape of the lips with a hard-edged line. Even the edges of the face, I keep those very soft so that if I want to make a change when I come back later, I'll be able to move in or out of that edge without disturbing something or being hindered by a hard edge that's dried from this drawing stage. Moving now to another part of the painting. I've already completed part of the line drawing on the other elements in the composition, and now I'm working on the inside of the mirror. There's one place where I want to show you a technique that's so easy. There's an area of bottle glass at the top of these arches, and if you lay the paint in fairly dark at first and then take a Q-tip, and as I'm doing, and remove the paint by stroking in a circular motion, if you will, I find this to be the easiest way to replicate the look of that circular glass that's in the top part of that arch. Once it's finished, then you have what appears to be lead between areas of circular glass. And ultimately, the final painting shows, or the final drawing is shown as a value study, using one single color, nothing in it as dark as what's in the girl's hair, as you'll notice here, and continuing to create the forms by adding light, medium, well, medium and dark values. The light value is the unpainted canvas itself. You'll notice that when I'm painting the feet of the loom, now that's the part of the chair is attached to the loom, but I lose the edges of the feet into the background. Waterhouse's original painting has a lot of areas that were lost. That is, the forms just melted one into the other. The only way you could see them was because one tiny little piece of it became evident in contrast with its background. That's part of the mystery of his work, that you can see forms without seeing every edge.